Yo, what's going on, everyone? This is Austin from Calling Our Shot. We're back to talk some NFL football, and actually, the regular season is only 3 weeks away. On opening night, we got the Buccaneers versus the Cowboys, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about safe players to target in your fantasy football draft. Now, before we get into it, click that subscribe button. We appreciate it, and let's set some ground rules right now. When I say safe, I mean that you know what you're going to get out of these guys. They might not have the highest ceiling like a guy like Tyler Lockett or Aaron Jones every single week, where they might drop 45 fantasy points and win you that week solely by themselves, but they also won't have a lot of terrible weeks in there where you're just sitting there and you're shaking your head and you're like, why did I draft these guys? Now, these guys are going to be ones that you can count on every single week. They're going to be very reliable in your starting lineup, and you should be targeting them in your fantasy football draft. So without further ado, let's hop into the first one. I'm not going to talk about the top guys like a Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry. You know what you're getting out of those guys. Those guys are very consistent. We're going to move on to the later rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, that you're looking for consistent production out of those players, because that's where you can win your league, is by nailing those rounds 2, 3, 4, 5 picks and getting 5 fantasy football studs onto your roster. So starting number 1, Nick Chubb, running back 7, pick 13 in current snake drafts on ESPN. Now, Nick Chubb, he might not necessarily be the first guy you thought I was going to say in this video, but prior to missing 4 games last season, Nick Chubb had played in all 16 games in his first 2 career NFL seasons. Last year, he only played 12 games, but over those 12 games, had 12 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards rushing, and he was running back 11 in PPR leagues, and that was in total points. Now, he was 7th in fantasy points per game, a little over 17 points per game, and he was as consistent as they came. He started off slow in week 1 with just 5 fantasy points against a very good Baltimore team. If you don't remember it, if you were a Browns fan, you probably remember week 1 because they got blown out and lost by 32 points. But he picked it up in weeks 2 and 3, finishing with 24 plus fantasy points in both of those, and then week 4 is the week he got injured, but he was off to a good start against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, he missed 4 games and a bye week, and then he returned with a vengeance in the second half of the year. He had double-digit fantasy points in each of the last 8 games, 14 plus points in 7 of those games, and 16 plus points in 6 of the final 8 games. He was on a tear, and the year prior to that, he finished as running back 8, double-digit fantasy points in 12 of 16 games in 2019. Now you can see, based on his ADP, he finished as running back 11 last year despite missing some games, and then running back 8 the year prior. This game being drafted as running back 7. That doesn't come as a surprise. It's pretty accurately ranked. Now, he's a lower tier running back 1. There's no shame in taking this guy towards the later end of your first round, the early second round. Now, one of my favorite sayings for fantasy football, you don't win your fantasy league in the first round, but you certainly can lose it. And with Chubb, I don't think you're going to lose it. I mean, sure, you'll have Kareem Hunt there stealing some touches, but this guy's as consistent as they come. A great runner. This offense for the Browns will be very good, and I think you're going to expect another top 10 running back season out of Nick Chubb, and you can lock that in. God forbid he doesn't get injured. Moving on to another guy. We're moving on to some wide receivers. The guy that I love to pick, very underrated, just like Nick Chubb, Allen Robinson, currently being drafted as wide receiver 13, pick 39 in snake draft. So talk about an underrated receiver. Allen, he is your guy. Now for starters, his availability, he's great. He's not normally a guy that's going to get dinged up, although he did have a hamstring injury yesterday in practice, but that's pretty minor. He should be fully healthy and ready to go. He's played in all 16 games each of the past 2 seasons, and he's produced like a top wideout in the NFL. Now, he doesn't have the name value like a Tyreek Hill or maybe a Stephon Diggs or a Devontae Adams out there, but this man produces. Last year, he hauled in 102 receptions, 1,250 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Year prior, he just missed the 100 receptions mark, 98 receptions, 1,150 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Now, you'd love to see the touchdowns increase, and maybe that takes him from, a lower-end wide receiver 1 towards, the Devontae Adams range where they're getting like 16, 18 touchdowns a year. But I'm a firm believer this Bears offense will be much better. I mean, they're going to be led by Andy Dalton for a couple weeks. Who knows? Maybe Justin Fields is starting by the time, you're watching this video. Maybe he's been announced the starter. Either way, Justin Fields will be starting for this Bears offense at some point. Now you look at Robinson, he was wide receiver 8 in PPR points in 2019, wide receiver 9 in 2020, but he slid down to 13th best wide receiver in fantasy football. Yeah, sure, I'll take the discount any day. This guy has a ridiculous target share. He saw 15 end zone targets last year, the 3rd most in the NFL, and he's never played in his career with a good quarterback. I mean, good in relative terms, a really elite quarterback. And while that probably won't change this year, I do think it will be improved from Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles that he was dealing with last year. For a guy that potentially could be your wide receiver 2 on your team, he's got wide receiver 1 upside every single week, and he's an absolute steal in the 4th round of drafts at pick 39. Moving on to the wide receiver being drafted right after him, Robert Woods, or Bobby Trees as I like to call him, wide receiver 14, pick 42. Robert has and will continue to be my favorite, most consistent wide receiver to snag in fantasy football. Now, he's a big name guy like a Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper and A.J. Brown. No, but he produces probably just as well as all those guys. Now, last season, he was wide receiver 14 in PPR. Year before that, 2014, not 2014. In 2019, he was wide receiver 14. 2018, wide receiver 11. You can see why I love this man. He's consistent. 14, 14, 11. He's a beast. And this guy is as consistent as they come. And you can see with its ADP, it's right around where I think he should be. But he's going to have much more consistent production than a lot of those other guys. Now, Bobby in his past, the Robert Woods, in his past, he's had a very, very high target share. That's one of the reasons I love him so much. Over his last 4 seasons with the Rams, he's had 24, 25, 23, and 24% target share. And now I'm even higher on him this year for 2 reasons. Now, number one, no more Jared Goff. And no disrespect to him, I do think Matthew Stafford will make this offense a lot better than it was under Jared Goff. You can debate me in the comments down below if you really feel differently. Number two, Cam Akers, sadly, is no longer there. And while this Rams defense or offense will still run a good amount of times, I just don't think they'll be as run-heavy as they would have been with Cam Akers at the helm, so I like it even more. Now, you look at Robert Woods, he's not necessarily a huge touchdown scorer. He's not, like I said, he's only at 6 and 7 touchdowns the past 2 years, but he adds some points and there were some designed runs, and with Stafford, anything's possible. Maybe the offense is even better than people anticipate. They'll be in the red zone more. Maybe he sees up close to 10 touchdowns. If he does that, he'll be a wide receiver 10 in fantasy football. Now, I love him, and I think you never know. With Jared Goff, you always look for Cooper Kupp on 3rd down. Maybe Stafford's go-to guy will be Robert Woods. You never know, but I think if I'm a big fan of Robert Woods, I can't say it enough, I'm going to be getting him on all my fantasy rosters when I can. Let's move on to one tight end that I feel is a safe option. Now, I could say Travis Kelce is as safe as they come, or even Darren Waller. I mean, both of those guys are fantasy rock stars and won a lot of people leagues last year. George Kittle, he's the other top 3 tight end in that trio. Instead, I'll go to Detroit and talk about TJ Hockenson. So he's one of the few tight ends that I feel comfortable drafting. So for starters, last season he finished as tight end 5. He averaged over 11 fantasy points per game, and he was just 1 fantasy point away from being, per game, well, 1 fantasy point total, or across the whole season, from being tight end 3 behind Robert Tonyan. So now, this year, I say Hockenson is about as safe as they come because of, you look at it, Jared Goff, he's known to target tight ends. That's what he did with the Rams, but also, and I just think he'll be looking to dump off a lot of passes to the tight end, but also, they didn't do anything. The Lions, if you're a Lions fan out there, I'm sorry. You guys didn't do anything to upgrade your receiving core. You let Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones both walk in free agency, and now you just got Jared Goff out there with TJ Hockenson, and that's about it. Very similar to Sam Darnold with my New York Jets. Didn't give him anything to work with, and that'll be the case this year. Now, I do really like TJ Hockenson. His ADP is right around where I would be comfortable taking him, especially if you're, the tight end position. It drops off very quickly, so I don't mind taking him, and I think he's worth it. Now, moving on to my final guy, and he will be a QB, and maybe he gets some slack. Justin Herbert, currently being drafted as QB 8, pick 70. So Herbert thrust into action in week 2 in what was a crazy event with Tyrod Taylor and the doctors. But he was thrust into action and he never looked back. 4,300 yards, 31 touchdowns, only 10 interceptions, and he was quiet on the ground, but 230 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. A great little bonus to his game. He was everything the Chargers could have asked for their young rookie QB, and he was everything a fantasy manager could have asked for because a lot of people picked him up right off the waiver wire. Now, he was very consistent, minus 1 game against the Patriots, which they lost 45-0, but that's Bill Belichick. He always dominates, rookie QBs, so I wasn't necessarily surprised. I ended up actually benching him that week because I just knew, never know with Bill Belichick. Now, you look at it, I love Herbert. Same spot, pick 70, and he's due for another massive season. For starters, the Chargers, their defense, will get some of their injured stars back, like Derwin James and Bosa, but still, this team is not going to necessarily be the best defensive team. They're still going to have high-scoring matchups against Patrick Mahomes to look forward to, and you're looking at their new offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi, coming over from the Saints, who led the Drew Brees era with so many high-scoring teams, especially over the past couple years. Very fantasy-friendly offense. Now, he's got talented weapons around him, which is all you could ask for. You got Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, you got Mike Williams, and Jared Cook, a lot of other talented weapons. And, like I said, he's due for 2 big shootouts versus Patrick Mahomes. At least that's what we want. I'll be betting the over in those games. But he's one of the safer QB options towards this back half of the draft. And in tomorrow's video, or one of the next upcoming videos, we're going to talk about waiting on a QB in your fantasy football league drafts. But you look at Tom Brady going just 2 spots after him. I love Justin Herbert over him just because of what he adds on the ground. And I think his team, you look at Tom Brady, that defense for the Buccaneers, it's going to be very good. It's going to win them some games. They won't even need Tom Brady to go out there and go absolutely ballistic. I do think the Chargers will need a little bit more out of Herbert, and that's why I'm counting on him as my fantasy football QB that I can really count on. He's going to be a safe player on your roster. Now, those are my favorite safe players to target in fantasy football this season. Let me know your favorite guys down below. Let me know a couple deep sleepers that I'm sleeping on down below as well. A couple other videos are popping up on the screen. We really appreciate you guys for tuning into them. This has been Austin, and I'll catch you guys again tomorrow. Peace out.